All right, so today we're going to be looking at the agronomic crop production team leader position. We've got some pretty cool resources from RoleCatcher that we'll be using for this deep dive. We've got career guides, interview guides, and even some stuff about their AI, which should help give you a bit of an edge. So let's jump in, and I guess our mission here is to try to give you the knowledge and confidence to nail this interview.
Yeah, I think that's a great goal. It's exciting to see somebody taking on this role. It really is a cool role that I think blends together hands-on agricultural expertise, but also some of those real key leadership skills that you need to manage a team and kind of navigate, you know,
Yeah.
the complex world of modern crop production.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think when people think about agriculture, sometimes they don't really think about the business side and the personnel side. So let's paint a picture, I guess, of what this role really looks like day to day. It's not just about knowing your crops, right?
No, definitely not. Of course, you'll be out in the field leading a team. You'll be making sure things are running smoothly. You'll be organizing work schedules. But you're also going to have to think about the strategic side of things, managing budgets, working with new technologies, and really just staying ahead of the curve because agriculture is always changing.
And speaking of staying ahead of the curve, the RoleCatcher Career Guide actually paints a pretty positive picture of this field. So it sounds like there's a good employment outlook, which is always promising. But let's get into the interview itself, because that's, I think, what a lot of people get nervous about. What are some of the most common questions you might encounter in one of these interviews? And how can people approach those questions strategically?
Yeah, one of the very first questions you'll likely hear is, what inspired you to pursue a career in agronomic crop production? And it might seem like a really straightforward, easy question, but it's a chance for you to showcase your passion and really connect with that interviewer and kind of let them know that you're genuinely interested in this field.
You don't just say like, oh, I like plants or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like you want to think back to specific experiences that really sparked your interest. Was it growing up on a family farm? Was it taking a certain class in college? Was it maybe reading a book or seeing a documentary? Find something that shows them that you've been thinking about this for a while.
That's a good point, I think, showing that you're not just there for a job, but
Yeah.
you're really trying to like contribute to an industry that you care about. Now, what about some of the questions that dive into your leadership skills? Because this is a team leader position, so they're going to want to know you can lead a team. So something like,
Oh,
how do you prioritize tasks when managing a team?
that's a classic one. They're really looking for someone who can juggle those responsibilities, can meet deadlines and keep everybody on track. The key here is to not just tell them what you do, but to really give a real-world example.
So like instead of saying, oh, I make a to-do list, I could say something like, well, when we had that sudden, weather event that threatened our harvest schedule,
Hmm.
I had to quickly assess the potential damage, and then I redelegated tasks based on the strengths of each member of my team.
Exactly. And maybe you can even talk about how you follow up with the team because that shows initiative and that you're committed to making sure everything's going smoothly.
Now, this next question from RoleCatcher sounds tricky. How do you ensure your team meets production targets while maintaining quality standards? I feel like that's a real balancing act.
It is. It is a balancing act. And I think that's what they want to see, that you understand that there's a delicate balance between producing as much as possible, but also upholding those quality standards that make your products, stand out.
Right, and I guess sometimes you might even have to sacrifice one for the other a little bit, right?
Yeah, sometimes that's necessary. But I think your answer should acknowledge that both production and quality are really important, and then highlight a time when you've successfully managed that.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you implemented a new quality control system that involved more frequent inspections. You could talk about how that system actually helped to identify potential issues early on, and that might have minimized waste, which ultimately could lead to an increase in the yield, while also maintaining or even exceeding those quality standards.
So I guess it's about showing that you're not just focused on getting the job done, but you're focused on doing it well. Now, you mentioned RoleCatcher, and I know that their AI can help you with some of this stuff. So, for example, let's say you come up with an answer to that question. You could type that answer into RoleCatcher, and the AI will actually analyze it and kind of tell you if you've hit on all the key points that the interviewer is looking for, or if your answer is specific enough.
Exactly. Or maybe if you need to add more data or more quantifiable results, because that always looks good.
That's so cool. And I think I read that RoleCatcher can also help you tailor your CV and cover letter to the specific job you're applying for.
Yeah, it can really help you highlight the skills that are most relevant to that specific role. You really want to make sure your application stands out from the crowd.
All right, let's tackle another one. Can you describe a time you had to make a difficult decision as a team leader?
Hmm.
I feel like that's a question that people always get nervous about.
Understandably. I think a lot of people freeze up when they hear that one, but remember, they're not looking for a perfect decision. They just want to understand your thought process and how you handle those tough situations.
So it's about being transparent and showing that you can think on your feet.
Exactly. Pick a situation where you had to weigh different factors,
Yeah.
where you maybe had to gather input from your team and then ultimately make that tough call.
So maybe even a decision that wasn't popular with everyone.
Yeah, and walk them through your thought process. What were the main things you had to consider? How did you communicate your decision to the team? And what did you learn from that whole experience?
So even if the outcome wasn't perfect, you can still show that you approach the situation in a strategic way.
Exactly, and that you're open to learning and growing from those tough situations.
This has been super helpful, breaking down these questions and
It's
thinking through these specific examples. It's really making this whole thing seem a lot less scary.
Yeah, preparation is key.
Yeah.
And once you understand what they're looking for, it does make it a lot easier. And don't forget, RoleCatcher and that AI can give you an extra edge. It can analyze your answers and give you that personalized feedback.
It really does sound like a secret weapon.
It can help you feel more confident and prepared, and I think that's what it's all about.
All right, so we're going to take a quick pause here, but we'll be back for part 2 where we'll cover some more of those interview questions, and we'll talk a bit more about those exciting career paths that await you in the world of agronomic crop production. All right, so we're back, and we're still digging into these interview questions for the agronomic crop production team leader position. In part 1, we talked about showcasing your passion. We talked about handling those difficult decisions, managing conflict. So now let's talk about how to demonstrate your ability to motivate and inspire a team.
Yeah, that's a big one. A common question you'll hear is, how do you motivate and engage your team members? And that's a question that goes beyond, just giving a good pep talk every now and then.
So what are they really looking for with that question?
They want to see that you understand what makes people tick. Think about yourself, like what motivates you. Is it recognition for a job well done? Is it opportunities to learn and grow? Maybe it's a sense of ownership, like you're really contributing to something bigger than yourself. A good leader knows how to tap into those intrinsic motivators, and they can create an environment where people feel valued and where they're inspired to do their best work.
Right, so it's not just about, cracking the whip and telling people what to do.
No, definitely not.
So how can I convey that understanding in my answer?
Use specific examples, Did you implement a peer recognition program that always boosts morale? Or maybe you gave your team members more autonomy in decision-making, which can really help with engagement and productivity. So just try to share a concrete example of how you've successfully motivated a team in the past.
Show, don't tell.
Exactly.
Now, what about questions that focus on managing a project from start to finish? Something like, can you describe a time when you had to manage a project from start to finish?
That's your chance to really put on that project management hat and walk them through a project that you successfully led. Think about timelines, think about milestones, delegation, problem solving, the whole process. So choose a project where you had a clear role in planning, executing, and overseeing each stage.
So, for example, I could talk about a time when I was responsible for implementing a new irrigation system for a specific crop. And I could talk about how I determined the scope of the project. I researched and selected the right system. I managed the installation process. And then, of course, I tracked the project's progress against the budget and the timeline.
Exactly. And don't forget to mention any challenges you faced. Were there any unexpected delays, technical difficulties? How did you adapt and find solutions to keep things moving forward?
Show them you can handle the curveballs.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about strategic decision-making, because that's a big part of this role as well. So a question like, can you describe a time when you had to make a strategic decision related to crop production? This one I feel like really taps into your expertise.
Absolutely. They're trying to assess your knowledge here.
So what kind of decisions are we talking about here?
Decisions that really impacted the yield. Resource allocation, sustainability practices, even market positioning. Anything from choosing a new crop variety to implementing a water conservation program.
Oh, okay. So I could maybe talk about a time when I analyzed data on soil health and crop yields. And based on that data, I decided to switch to a more drought-tolerant variety. Because, climate change, we got to be thinking about
Yeah.
these things. Got to be resilient.
Exactly. And walk them through how you arrived at that decision. What data did you look at? What were the risks? What were the potential rewards? How did you communicate that decision to the stakeholders? And what was the ultimate outcome?
So it's about showing them that I can think critically, I can analyze information, and I can make informed decisions that are going to help the company.
Exactly. Now, speaking of that question we talked about earlier, about staying current on industry trends, RoleCatcher's AI can actually help you with your answer for that one, too.
Oh, really? How so?
Let's say you type in a list of the journals you read, the conferences you attend, the online courses you've taken. The AI can analyze that and give you suggestions for making it even stronger. Maybe it'll recommend mentioning specific thought leaders that you follow, or highlighting how you've actually applied that new knowledge to improve your work.
That's really cool. It's like having a personalized guide to make sure you're hitting all the right notes. Now, let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about those career paths. We touched on this briefly earlier, but the RoleCatcher Career Guide actually provides a pretty detailed roadmap for advancement in this field.
It does, and it's good to see that the demand for skilled leaders in crop production is growing. That's great news for anyone considering this as a career.
Yeah, so we talked about that typical entry-level position, where you're getting that hands-on experience. What comes after that?
Well, usually you'll move up to a junior crop production worker role, where you'll start taking on more responsibility, you'll be supervising other workers, and you might even get involved in some of the planning and implementing of those crop production strategies.
And then eventually you move up to that senior crop production worker level, where you're leading teams, you're managing budgets, and you're making those strategic decisions.
Exactly. It's a natural progression.
And what I think is really cool is that the career guide also highlights some potential paths beyond that team leader role.
Yeah, it's not just a linear path.
So tell me more about those possibilities.
Well, you could move into management. You could be overseeing larger teams, maybe even multiple farms. Some people even go on to start their own agricultural businesses.
That's awesome. So there's really room for growth. And for people with an entrepreneurial spirit.
Definitely. And with all the advancements in technology, I think we're going to see even more new roles and opportunities emerging in the future.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be in this industry. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get back to those interview questions. There's still a few more that we need to cover.
You're right. Let's dive into some additional questions that can really help you showcase your leadership abilities and really show them that you're the right fit for this role.
All right, let's do it. I'm ready. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the agronomic crop production team leader interview. In part 1 and part 2, we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about showcasing your passion, those tricky leadership questions, how to navigate things like conflict resolution, strategic decision-making, all that good stuff.
And we talked about how RoleCatcher's AI can really help you prepare, tailoring your application, practicing your answers, giving you that extra edge. It really is like having a coach right there in your pocket.
Speaking of guidance, let's go back to the RoleCatcher Career Guide for a second. We touched on career paths earlier in this deep dive, but I think it's worth diving a little bit deeper into those insights.
Yeah, absolutely. The career guide really does lay out a clear path for advancement in this field. And it's encouraging to see that the demand for skilled leaders in crop production is growing, which is great news for anyone who's thinking about this career path.
So we know that the journey often starts with that entry-level crop production worker role, where you're getting that hands-on experience, learning the ropes. What would typically come after that?
Well, from there, you probably move up to a junior crop production worker position where you start taking on a little bit more responsibility. You might be supervising other workers, maybe even starting to get involved in the planning and implementation of some of those crop production strategies.
And then eventually you move up to that senior crop production worker level, where you're leading teams, you're managing budgets, making those big strategic decisions.
Exactly. It's a natural progression, building on your skills and your knowledge at each level.
And what I think is really interesting is that the career guide also highlights some potential paths beyond that team leader role.
Yeah, it's not always a straight line.
So tell me more about those possibilities.
Well, some people might move into management positions where they're overseeing larger teams, maybe even multiple farms, and some people even go the entrepreneurial route and start their own agricultural businesses.
It's really cool to see that there's room for that kind of growth and entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, definitely. And as technology continues to transform agriculture, I think we're just going to see more and more diverse and exciting opportunities pop up.
Well, it's definitely an exciting time to be in this industry. But before we wrap up this deep dive, let's give our listeners a few final pieces of advice. For that big interview,
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is that an interview is a two-way street. It's a chance for you to showcase yourself, your skills, your experience, but it's also an opportunity for you to learn more about the company, about the team, about the specific role.
so go in with confidence, be yourself, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Absolutely. Show them your passion for agriculture, your expertise,
Uh,
and your enthusiasm for leading a team.
And hey, even if you don't land this particular job,
Mm.
the preparation process itself is valuable. You know you've gained insights into your strengths, you've practiced your communication skills.
Yeah, and you've learned more about this industry.
Exactly. Who knows, maybe this deep dive has sparked a new interest for you. Or maybe it's helped you clarify your career goals.
That's the beauty of continuous learning. It opens up so many possibilities.
All right, so on that note,
Yeah.
we're going to leave you with one final thought. As agriculture continues to evolve,
Mm.
and as technology plays a bigger and bigger role, how do you see yourself shaping the future of crop production?
That's a great question to think about as you're embarking on this journey.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We wish you the best of luck in your interview and in your future career in agriculture.